forget that. All right, so today we're going to be doing a lecture on basic chemistry. Just a little bit of physical chemistry today. Hopefully we'll talk about and we'll talk about some of the properties of water, and then we will get to pH, hopefully. If we don't get all the way through pH, we will leave that and talk about it on Thursday when we talk about organic chemistry, because that's a little bit shorter of a lecture than today's is. So if we don't quite finish, we can do that. Okay. Any questions before we get started?
Did you get me on roll? Sorry, I was having the problem getting in right away. Trevor Bond.
I'm just using the thing for roll.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay,
I'm basically just trying to look for people that I haven't seen yet in the class. I've seen you, so you're good.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, so I'm still looking for Anthony Fudo. Is Chad Benner here? Yeah, you should be here, Chad. Okay, yeah, so I think I just have one person to drop that I have not heard from at all. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I think I'm going to unvideo myself just because I don't know, unless I start waving my hands around and I'm adding something to it by being there. Okay. Let me put this, we'll make that smaller. We'll put that over there because that works better. Okay, so we're going to be talking about basic chemistry for biology today. Let's do the slideshow, make it bigger. Go. Okay, so this is a biology class, so why do we have to talk about chemistry? Well, because basically everything that is alive, actually everything, period, is made up of chemistry. So we have to understand a little bit about chemistry so that we can understand how life works as well. Living things are alive because the molecules that make up organisms are constantly involved in chemical reactions. So we need to understand a little bit about how these chemical reactions work to understand how things, how life works. Chemistry is the study of matter. Matter is anything that takes up space and has mass. Mass is the amount of matter something contains. The weight that something has is different from the amount of matter because because matter doesn't change. The amount of matter that is contained in an organism or in a rock or in whatever doesn't change, but its weight can change because weight is a product of gravity. And since gravity is different on different planets, then the weight of an object can change, whereas its mass doesn't. So in other words, I'm going to weigh a lot more on Earth than I would on the moon because there's a lot more gravitational pull on the Earth than there is on the moon. Matter consists of elements, and elements are substances that can't be broken down by ordinary chemical means. Where does everything come from? The current theory on where the universe came from is called the Big Bang Theory, different, of course, from the TV show. But the Big Bang is basically that everything was a singularity at one time. This is about 12 to 14 billion years ago, believed to be the beginning of our universe. Everything was at a tiny point of infinite density, and then it exploded. The idea behind the Big Bang Theory is that objects in the universe seem to be moving away from us. So the universe seems to be expanding. And by virtue of that expansion, we believe that it used to be closer together. Matter, the number one element in the universe is, of course, hydrogen. And hydrogen will form into stars. These stars are great big, they're fusion, they're great big balls where fusion takes place. And so hydrogen will fuse into helium. Helium will fuse into, heavier and heavier elements, carbon, oxygen. Once iron is reached, once they begin to fuse into iron, the star cannot gain any more energy from that. And so if it's a star of a certain size and class, generally, it can explode. And these are called supernovas. And when supernovas explode, they spread all of these heavy elements out into space. And these heavy elements can then coalesce and turn into planets. So that's where we get things like gold and platinum and all those heavier elements that you can find on Earth here. So basically, we are all made of stardust. When these stars explode and spit out all of these different types of elements, those are the elements that eventually can be made into non-living, into planets and things like that, and also into living things such as us. So there are 92 natural elements. And by natural elements, we mean these are the elements that occur in nature. There are also more than a dozen man-made elements. These are usually short-lived. They're produced in collisions and superconductors, so they live for split seconds or things like that. Of the 92 natural elements, 25 are essential to life. But of those 25, there are 4 big ones that make up 96% of living matter. So this class will be concerned mostly with those 4 big ones: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. So most of what we're going to talk about today is about those particular elements and those particular atoms that make up those elements. The other things that are needed for life are not needed in very large amounts. Phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, potassium, and some heavy metals, zinc, nickel, iron, magnesium, copper, chromium, et cetera, et cetera. These are all elements that are essential to life. You can't live without them, but they're not needed in as large quantities as the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. This is a table showing the abundance. Okay, there's a chat. Whoops, I got bumped out. Huh. That was weird. Are you guys still sharing with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody put something in the chat. It won't open.
It just says plants need those minerals too. From Kamal.
It said what?
Plants need those minerals too, is the
Oh yes, of course. All living things. Plants are living things. Yeah, okay. So here's, it's hard to see the chat when I'm in the share screen thing. Okay, so I'll usually get back to that. Okay. This is just a chart showing the relative abundance of the different elements in the solar system. So this is our solar system. And you can see by far, hydrogen is the most common element. Hydrogen is the simplest of the elements too. 1 proton, 1 neutron, and 1 electron. Helium is 2 protons, so it follows. Lithium happens to be 3, but this is not as abundant as, say, carbon or oxygen. So you can see carbon, oxygen, nitrogen up here are all also very common. Uranium, less so. And this chart is the same sort of thing, parts per million by mass. Again, just showing you that hydrogen is, again, the most common element in actually the universe and in our solar system, followed by helium, because those are the 2 simplest atoms, hydrogen and helium, and so on. So this is a blurry table of the elements. I apologize for the blurriness of it, but it's good enough to do what we need to do with it. First of all, I'd like to say that the table of the elements, this particular table of the elements was developed by a Russian genius by the name of Dmitry Mendeleev. He actually had been working on this for a long period of time. There were other people also currently working on how to lay out the table of known elements, because this is arranged not only by size, with hydrogen being the smallest, and then coming down here to whatever UUN is, which is the largest here. And then you have these other series down at the bottoms here that really don't concern us for this class. So it's in order from the smallest elements to the largest elements, but it's also grouped in blocks depending on their properties. So that was the part that he actually saw in a dream, at least the story goes. And this is actually a very elegant solution to the grouping of the different elements. He also left spaces where elements had not yet been discovered, and those elements had been put into the little spots he left behind, just as he predicted they would be once they were finally discovered. A couple of things I want to point out: every element has an atomic number that's up in the top corner here. So let's see, I can, oh, that brought me the chat up. That's interesting. Anyway, so you can see here that you have the symbol of the element, which is the H. You have a 1 up in the corner here, the little 1. That's the atomic number. So its atomic number of hydrogen is 1. And the atomic number is the number of protons that are going to be found in the atom. And then underneath you have the atomic weight. So that's going to be atomic weight down here. I'm just going to put WT for weight. And this is the atomic number, is the top number. So the atomic number, put in your notes, the atomic number is equal to the number of protons. And the atomic weight is approximate, and it's equal to the approximate weight of a hydrogen atom. And it's approximate, I mean, it's not exactly 1, because there's one, it's actually made up, the atomic weight is made up of the number of protons plus the number of neutrons, which both have weight, and then the number of electrons don't really count in the weight because they're negligible, about 1/2000th the weight of a proton or a neutron. And there's also isotopes, so it's like the average weight of a hydrogen atom is what's considered its atomic weight. Give me my little thingy back. And one other thing I wanted to point out before we move on to the next slide is these elements over here in purple over on this side. Over here. These are called noble gases. And I wanted to point out the noble gases, helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon. These are all very unreactive elements. They're very happy and stable with just one hanging out. The reason for this is because their outer shells, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit here, but the outer shells of electrons, atoms are, of course, in the center of an atom, in the nucleus, you have protons and neutrons. And then in the outer part of an atom, you have a cloud of electrons. There's electrons and they zipping around in various orbitals, actually. And it's these outer electrons in the very outer shell of an atom that react with the electrons in other outer shells of other elements, and they form bonds, they form reactions. So everything is reactive if it's not completely filled in its outer shell. In the noble gases, their outer shells are completely filled, so they're very unreactive, and they're what I call happy. They're not out looking for trouble because they're content. They have all the electrons they need to make them stable. It's actually being stable. I think of it as being happy, but it's really stable. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to point out. And also, we're going to be dealing with hydrogen. We're basically just going to be dealing with the first two rows of this chart because we got hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon in the first row. And then we also talk a little about sodium and chlorine, which are in the second row because sodium chloride is, of course, table salt. So that is something we do talk about because it's a very good example of an ionic bond. So we'll get to that. Okay. Okay, so again, the atomic number, so put this in your note, the atomic number is the number of protons in an element's nucleus. So for example, hydrogen has 1 proton, its atomic number is 1, helium has 2, for atomic number of 2, carbon has 6, atomic number of 6. The mass number is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. For helium, he has a mass number of 4, carbon has a mass number of 6. And the atomic mass is approximately equal to the atom's weight. And the weight is composed of the number of neutrons plus protons because the electrons are not included because they're only about 1/2000th the mass of a proton. Neutrons and electrons are, neutrons and protons are about the same weight. So this is the structure of an atom. You can kind of illustrate that in a couple of different ways. You can do it with this little two-dimensional model over here where you have, this is a helium atom. Helium atoms have 2 protons. They have 2 neutrons. The protons are shown in pink, the neutrons are shown in gray. And then the electrons are shown in blue. Protons, of course, have a positive charge. Electrons have a negative charge, and neutrons have no charge. So the electrons actually circle around the nucleus. And that is why you see the fuzzy blue ball in the second illustration here. That's kind of the cloud model, because the electrons are not actually in like one single spot where you can identify where they're at. So they kind of form a cloud around it. Now, the space between the nucleus and the electrons is actually pretty large. If you were to take a carbon atom, for example, and put the nucleus on the 50-yard line of Qualcomm Stadium, which doesn't exist anymore because they've torn it down. But if you were to do that in the old Qualcomm Stadium, and if you sat up in the very top in the nosebleed seats, that would be where your electrons would be. So if it was the size of an orange, if your nucleus was the size of an orange, your electrons would be out in the nosebleed seats. So matter is really made up of empty space, which is kind of cool. And if you think about it, what it's really made up of is the energy, because those electrons zipping around the protons are what gives everything the ability to react. It's the energy. So things are made of energy. This is the model of a carbon atom. So it's going to have 6 electrons zipping around the nucleus, which is going to be composed of 6 protons and 6 neutrons. The number of electrons will balance out with the number of protons in every element as it appears in its the table of the elements. So those balance out. So in the table of the elements, nothing is charged. Of course, you can have charged atoms. They are charged by either gaining an electron or losing an electron and becoming ions. So again, this is just the composition of an atom here. Protons have a positive charge, neutrons are neutral. They both weigh 1 Dalton. Don't worry about what a Dalton is. It's just a weight used to weigh atomic particles, and electrons are about 1/2000th the size. So all elements, modern atomic theory states that all elements are composed of atoms. Atoms are extremely small. All atoms of a given element have the same chemical properties and contain the same number of protons. So they're called isotopes. Some elements will have different number of neutrons, but they always have the same number of protons. We'll get to that in just a second. Compounds are formed by chemical combination of two or more atoms and only in whole numbers. So you never get half an atom. And atoms are the units of chemical change. And what drives chemical change is going to be the outer shell of the atoms, the outer shell of electrons. And that's what we're going to look at in just a second. So as I said, there are such a thing as isotopes, and isotopes are going to differ from each other in the number of neutrons that they have in the nucleus. So a good example of an element that has different isotopes is carbon. So almost all the carbon on the planet and probably the universe is whatever. I don't know if I want to go that far because I don't know that much. Okay, so let's stick with the planet. All the 99% of the carbon on this planet is in the form of carbon-12, which is written with this 1, 2, the 12 before the C, and that means carbon-12, which has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. There is an isotope of carbon called carbon-13, which has a 13 written before the carbon, and it has 7 neutrons and 6 protons. It's about 1% of carbon. And then there's a little bit less than 1% of carbon is in the form of carbon-14, written with the 1,4 in front of the carbon, and that has 8 neutrons and 6 protons. So the interesting thing about the carbon-14 isotope is that it is unstable. So this is just a chart showing the number of protons doesn't change for the isotopes. The number of neutrons does. The electrons does not change either. So these are all uncharged because the neutrons have no charge, so they don't add charges to it, so they don't make them into ions. They're just isotopes. Okay, so carbon-14 is a radioactive or unstable isotope. What does that mean? That means that it will spontaneously give off particles, and these particles are energetic. So this is termed being radioactive. This amount of the amount of particles given off is given off at a very steady rate. And that makes carbon-14 something we can use. It's an element we can use to date things, because the amount of, as things are alive, they take in carbon-14. When they die, they do not take in any more carbon-14. So the carbon-14 that they have begins to decay, and it decays as in what is called a half-life. And the half-life for carbon-14 happens to be 5,600 years. And that a half-life means 50% of the radioactive atoms that are going to decay have left. So after every half year, it goes, from 50% to 25% to an eighth, and so on. And because they're radioactive, because they give off this energetic particles, you can use them you can see those particles too. So you can use them as tag molecules and follow them through metabolic processes or other chemical processes. And that can aid in gaining biological knowledge. Radioactivity is dangerous. These small particles can, because they are so small, they can enter into your cells and destroy DNA. So that's radioactivity. It can give you cancer by damaging the DNA in your cells. So this is an example of using a radioactive element in a scanning, in a PET scan, a PET scan. So this shows, see, they labeled the beta amyloid plaques here. And beta amyloid is associated with Alzheimer's disease. So you can see that, and then you can look at it under a scan, and those areas that are labeled will light up quite brightly. So you can see the difference between the healthy brain here and the Alzheimer's patient's brain. So that's just one example of how radioactive isotopes can be used in medicine. They can also be used to fight cancer, proton therapy, and things like that. Okay, so that's what radioactivity means. There's a half-life associated with it and gives out energetic particles. It's unstable. Okay, elements versus compounds. Elements are composed of atoms that are of the same type. So elements, some atoms tend to join together with a partner, and it makes for a very stable relationship. And if all the atoms in a compound, it's not really a compound, but if all the atoms are the same, then it's called an element. So some examples of elements are N2H2O2, 2, which indicate 2 nitrogen atoms together, or 2 hydrogen atoms, or 2 oxygen atoms together. And these are very stable. Compounds are composed of atoms of different types. So H2O, you have hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms. And then sodium chloride, you have sodium atoms and chlorine atoms put together. So that's the difference between an element and a compound. If you have any questions along the way, just go ahead and ask. Okay, so now we're going to get to the kind of the gist of the whole thing, is talking about the valence electrons of the different atoms, because this is where all the magic happens. The electrons that are in the outer shell of any atom are the electrons that are going to react. So when a shell is completely filled, that means it's an unreactive element. When the shell is not completely filled, then it's reactive, because it's going to be looking to fill that outer shell. So small, get a little pencil here, small atoms like such as hydrogen. Hydrogen has only one outer shell. It's got 1 electron in that outer shell. The first shell, let me type this out right here. The first shell is stable or happy with 2 electrons, 2E minus, 2 electrons. Okay, so hydrogen just has 1 shell, as does helium. The next shell out, give me a pencil. Okay. If you have 2 shells, we'll make here 2 on the inside, and we'll make a second shell out here. We'll make this carbon. The second shell and carbon has 4 electrons, but it wants 4 more because the second shell second valence shell is happy with 8 electrons. And since we're only concerned with elements up to about 3 shells, so it's going to be 2 in the first shell, 8 in the second shell, and 8 in the third shell. Okay, second shell is happy with 8, and the third shell is happy with 8. So this is going to determine how many bonds an element will make. How many valence electrons they have in their outer shell determines how many bonds they're going to make. So for instance, hydrogen, super reactive, it's got 1 electron, looking for that second electron. So it's going to want to form a bond with something that will allow it to have 2 electrons circling around that. So it can form with 2 hydrogens, for example. Put another hydrogen over here. It's got an electron. This one has the 1 electron. So now both hydrogens will have the 2 electrons zipping around them. They're both stable, and that would be H2, which is a stable element. Carbon is going to want to make 4 bonds because it's going to want to get 4 more electrons. Once it has those 4 extra electrons, then it's going to have 8 electrons around it. It's going to be stable. So it's looking to make 4 bonds. The interesting thing about carbon is it can make 2 double bonds. It can make a triple bond and a single bond. It can make 4 single bonds. It makes it a very versatile element, and it's the element of life is carbon on this planet. Okay, so let's go into a little more detail about that. Oxygen has 6 valence electrons, so it's going to be happy. How many electrons is it going to want to be happiest? If it's got 6 valence, it's going to want how many in the outer shell?
Additional 6.
2?
No, it's going to want 2, so it has a total of 8. So it's going to want 8 in the outside, so it's going to want to make 2 bonds. And again, oxygen can make 1 single double bond, or it can make 2 bonds. So how many valence electrons determines how the bonding pattern basically between elements. Okay, we're going to look at that a little bit more. Okay, so here's a table of valence electrons for some of the common elements, and these are the ones we're concerned with, right? Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. So hydrogen, again, it just has that 1 outer electron, so it wants 1 more, so it's going to want to make 1 bond. So hydrogen is looking to make 1 bond. So it can share that extra electron. Carbon has 4, so the ones that are colored in, that shows the ones that exist, and the ones that are shown in the little dotted line, those are the ones that it's wanting. So carbon's atomic number is 6. It has 2 electrons in the inner ring, and then its outer ring has 4 electrons. So it's going to want to make 4 bonds. Nitrogen has 2 in its inner ring, so that ring is fully filled, and then its outer ring has 5. So how many bonds is it going to want to make?
Three more.
3.
Right, you got it. 3 bonds so that it can have those 8 electrons. And then oxygen, we already said, oxygen wants to make those 2 bonds to make it stable and give it 8 in that outer shell. Okay, one of the things that aren't listed here that we're going to talk about sodium and chloride, because table salt illustrates an ionic bond. So sodium, if we were to take a sodium atom, so let's say this is sodium. Okay, so we have the nucleus here, and then it's going to have 2 electrons in this shell, and then it has another shell that's completely filled with 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then it has another shell, and it's got only 1 in that outer shell. So that makes sodium extremely reactive because it's got this 1 extra electron. So rather than try to get 7 more electrons, sodium wants to give that electron away. And the one thing that it's really happy to give it away to would be chlorine, which has 2 in the inner circle, 8 in the outer, 1, 2, 3, in the second, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then in the outer one, in its third shell, it has 3 shells. It has 7. So now you can see why they like to get together, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's got a space for 1 more electron, right? To be happy. And sodium would really wants to get rid of this one electron. So they get together, and sodium gives up its electron, becomes Na plus, which is an ion, gives up its electron to chlorine, which then becomes Cl minus, and that attraction of the positive charge with the negative charge makes for a strong bond called an ionic bond. Getting a little ahead of myself on the PowerPoint. But those, these have 3 shells. Everything else that we're going to be talking about has the 2 shells. And we're not going to get into any orbitals beyond that. So those of you that already had chemistry, that's all we're going to be talking about is these s orbitals, these first 3 layers. So this shows the first 3 levels of the table of the elements. And again, we're looking at hydrogen, we're looking at carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and then sodium is out here with that 1 electron on the outside. Chlorine is over here with that 7 electrons on the outside. So it wants to share that 1 electron from sodium. So the noble gases again, helium, neon, argon, for example, they are the totally filled outer shell. So helium has 2, it only has 1 outer shell. The first outer shell is happy with 2, so it's completely content with its 2 electrons in its outer shell. Neon has 2 shells, it has 8 in its second shell, and then argon also has the 3 shells, but it has 8 in the outer shell. So these are all very stable. They're not looking to share any electrons. They're not looking to get rid of any electrons. So they're not reactive. Whereas hydrogen, carbon, and sodium, for example, do not have filled outer shells. And so these are reactive elements, and they are looking to make bonds with other things. So chemical bonds come in different types. And chemical bonds between 2 or more elements form them into compounds. And again, it's the outer valence shells of the electrons that interact and form the bonds. The strongest types of bonds are ionic and covalent. The third type of bond is called the hydrogen bond. The hydrogen bond is a weak bond, but it is extremely important in biological systems. In fact, its weakness is one of its strong points, you might say. Yeah, hydrogen bonds are actually considered a weak bond, but they're very important because they allow for chemical reactions to happen. Let's see. So these are just some examples of compounds. Sodium chloride, we've already talked about. Water is, of course, 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. And glucose, C6H12O6, is also a compound that we'll be talking about a lot in this class. So let's look at how the bonds are formed. So for example, let's talk about the ionic bond, and we've actually just talked about that already. So sodium has the 1 electron in its valence shell, and chlorine has those 7. So sodium wants to give up that 1 electron, that drops it back down to its second shell, and that shell is totally filled, so that makes it happy and stable. And chlorine wants that 1 more electron to complete its outer shell. So sodium loses an electron and becomes Na plus, which is a positive ion. And chlorine gains an electron and becomes Cl minus, so it's a negative ion. And then the charge between those 2 makes for a bond and makes them very strong. It's a strong bond. Any questions on that? Okay. So you might have a question on the first exam about which one gives up its outer electron. So remember that the outer electron comes from the sodium, not from the chlorine. Chlorine is bigger than sodium. It makes a crystalline structure. That sodium atom is given up, and then it goes and hangs out with the chlorine, buzzing around the chlorine. That makes both of them happy, but charged, and that holds them together. And it actually forms kind of a cube. You can see the chlorine is much bigger than the sodium. And if you look at table salt, even if you have just little tiny grains of it, if you look at it real close under a microscope, you'll see they're little cubes. Covalent bonds are shared electrons. They're formed when two elements, two or more elements, of course, get together and share their electrons, giving them both 8 in the outer shell, unless, of course, they're only, well, with hydrogen, they're only looking for 2. So in the case of hydrogen, you have that, give me a pencil again. You have the one hydrogen is going to have the one outer electron, right? And they get another hydrogen here. It's got an outer electron. The electrons basically circle around both of them, making it stable. So H2 is a stable element. HH with one bond. So the bonds would be like there's 2 electrons there. You can kind of picture it like that. I don't know if my scribbling helps. So covalent bonds can come in one of 2 flavors. They can be equally shared. Electrons equals nonpolar covalent bonds, and then unequal sharing equals a polar covalent bond. Does anybody know of a common compound that has a polar covalent bond?
Water?
You got it. Okay, so here's the hydrogen bond. You've got the 1 electron on each one. Get 2 hydrogen molecules together. They share the 2 electrons, and they're all happy. Oxygen also makes covalent bonds. So again, here they have, but they both have 6 in the outer ring. They want to share 2 electrons, so they actually make a double bond. And a double bond is indicated in this fashion where you have the O and the 2 lines between it. So each one of these lines consists of 2 electrons. And so that's what a double bond looks like. Or that's how you draw a double bond. And then, as I said, if they're shared equally, you get nonpolar covalent, like H2O2, CH4. These are all shared equally. But when they're not shared equally, it's called a polar covalent bond. And one of the great examples of a polar covalent bond is water. And so what you have with water is a slightly positive charge at the hydrogens and a slightly negative charge at the oxygen. Why this happens is just because it's one of those properties of oxygen. It's a highly electronegative atom, so it grabs harder at those electrons than the hydrogen does, and so they hang out with the oxygen more than they do with the hydrogen. This gives it a slight charge. So a water molecule is shaped kind of like this. You have a rather large oxygen atom and 2 smaller hydrogen atoms, and they're kind of put together in sort of a Mickey Mouse fashion, where you've got the oxygen and then you've got the 2 hydrogens kind of off to the side like that. So they're kind of like little Mickey Mouse ears on it, kind of shown here. This indicates a slightly negative charge at the oxygen, and this is a slightly positive charge at the hydrogens. So that's a delta, not a very good delta. Anyway, it looks more like a sperm. Anyway, that means a slight charge. That's what that is. It's like a delta. Okay. My attempts don't look so good. All right. So it's because these the electrons will hang out with the oxygen. Now this gives water some really special properties. So water has a polar covalent bond. Now between water molecules, I think I have a slide coming up here. Oh, okay, until we get to that. The last bond we want to talk about is a hydrogen bond. And a hydrogen bond, all of these little dotted lines here indicate hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds form between hydrogens and oxygens often, not exclusively, but often. And these are weak bonds, and they're bonds by, they're actually, it's kind of a polar attraction, but they can be broken apart fairly easily. This happens to be a diagram of cellulose here. Cellulose is actually one of the strongest substances, organic substances on the planet. Of course, it makes up trees and things like that. Each one of these little structures here indicates a ring structure of carbon. Each one of the corners of the ring structure, except for the one that is shown with an oxygen, is a carbon atom. Anyway, cellulose is really strong because it's actually held together by lots of covalent bonds and also lots of hydrogen bonds. But getting back to the water molecule, so here we have 4 water molecules, 5 water molecules, I can't count. And this is how water joins to each other. So inside the water molecule, and this will be on the test. So this bond right here is polar covalent. But this bond right here, oh, it already says hydrogen bonds, right? So water molecules, within the water molecule, it's held together with a polar covalent bond, very strong bond. But between water molecules, they're held together with hydrogen bonds. Now, when water is liquid, in its liquid state, those hydrogen bonds are constantly breaking apart and forming with another water molecule. So that's what keeps it liquid. It's kind of like a square dance. If you've ever been to a square dance, you change partners a lot. So at any one time, each water molecule is joined to 4 other water molecules in this kind of square-based triangle formation. But in liquid water, those partners are constantly changing. Now, as it freezes, they will retain these bonds and they won't keep breaking and reassembling, and they will actually lengthen slightly. That's one of the weird properties about water, is that it's fluffier when it's solid than it is when it's liquid. This is a very rare property of water. Most things, when you freeze them, they become more dense, not less dense. Water becomes less dense when you freeze it. So that'll be a question on the test. Remember, polar covalent within a water molecule, there's hydrogen bonds forming between water molecules. Another interesting property of water, we're going to go through the properties of water here. Another interesting one is that at room temperature, you can find it in all states. You can find it as liquid, ice, and gas, because it's in the air as water vapor. You can have liquid water, and then you can also have ice at room temperature. Of course, it will melt at room temperature, but it will stay there for a while. I mean, it doesn't immediately sublimate or something. So properties of water is what we're on now. Now we want to learn what makes water. I mean, water is the element of life. It's the compound of life on this planet. We don't know that life can exist anywhere without water. As far as we know, it doesn't. Well, of course, we haven't been to any other planets that have life yet, but we think that water is one of those things that we're always looking for to see if we could find life on another planet. Water seems to be key to this planet and probably to many planets because of its interesting properties. So one of the things that water does is it's the solvent of life. It dissolves stuff. So polar mixes with polar. So it's called, it's sometimes called the universal solvent, but it's not really because it doesn't dissolve oils. But we'll say water dissolves polar substances. And this drives chemical reactions. So most chemical reactions, biological chemical reactions, take place in an aqueous environment, and it's because of this solvent property of water that helps things to react. Okay, so what we could say here is that first, what we should actually tell you, a solution. What is a solution? A solution equals a solvent plus. I hope you can read this red. Okay. A solvent plus a solute. So the solvent equals the dissolver, and the solute equals the dissolved. So for instance, if I mix sugar with water, the water is going to dissolve the sugar. And so my sugar would be my solute and my water would be my solvent. And my solution would be sugar water. Right? So number one property, it's a biological solvent and it dissolves other polar substances. Next property. Oh, this is how it works. It's called hydrolysis. We're going to talk about this on Thursday. So how it works is because of the polarity of water, the hydrogens are slightly positive, the oxygen is slightly negative. And for instance, if it gets together with another polar molecule, such as sugar or salt, here we're seeing it with salt. Salt has a negative chlorine side and a positive sodium side. So the hydrogens are going to get together with that chlorine because they're slightly positive and they're going to be attracted to the slightly negative chlorine. And then the oxygen is going to be attracted to the sodium. And so they're going to pull them apart. Polar substances can be dissolved by water because of water's polar properties. And so you can see out here how they kind of pull those molecules apart. Another property of water is its high heat capacity. So water actually heats more slowly than metal. What heat capacity is, it's the amount of heat that flows into or out of a system to change its temperature by 1 degree Celsius. So water heats more slowly than metal does, and water also loses heat more slowly. So this makes water an insulator. This affects, of course, global temperatures. Areas on the coast, for instance, are going to be warmer in the winter because of the large ocean sitting off there. And they're going to be cooler in the summer for the same reason, because of the fact that water retains heat. And it also it has evaporating cooling properties. So it keeps it cooler in the summer because the water is cooler than the air, and it keeps it warmer in the winter because the water is warmer than the air. So evaporative cooling allows for animals such as us to sweat and to cool ourselves that way. And also respiration plants. Plants release water into the atmosphere in the process of doing photosynthesis. We'll talk about that later. And as it does that, it also helps to cool plants off. Other properties of water that make it really interesting substance is that it's sticky. It's sticky again because it's a polar molecule. All the properties that water has, it has because it's a polar molecule. Its stickiness comes in a few different forms: cohesion and adhesion. I could say two different forms. Cohesion means water will stick to itself. Cohesion, so think of it like co-workers. I don't know. Water sticks to itself. And adhesion, water will also stick to other substances. The fact that there's cohesion and adhesion actually leads to the ability of plants to move water against gravity in capillary action. So I can illustrate that. See, I'll draw you a little. And it also gives it a high surface tension because of the stickiness of water. So little critters like this water strider can walk on water. Also that basilisk lizard can walk on water. He can frill out his toes, get a lot of surface area, and he can run across the surface of water because it's sticky. We can float boats in it because of its stickiness. You just have to displace the right amount. Capillary action, if I was to, this is supposed to be a cup. So that's a cup of water. So if I fill my glass of water and I put a straw in here, pretend that's straight, the water will actually, because the water will stick to the sides of the straw, it will go up the straw. And because the water sticks to other water molecules, it will bring the liquid up with it. So if you stick a straw in a cup of water, you're going to see that the water level in the straw is higher than the water level in the glass. And that's called capillary action. And plants use that. They have long, narrow cells called xylem. That make up the root system. And they transport tissue. It's one of the transport tissues in plants. And this long cell structure allows for plants that can, of course, be, the coastal redwoods can grow over 270 feet tall. And you think of all the weight of water that it's moving up that plant, 275 feet in the air. You know how heavy water can be, right? And if you've ever lugged around a gallon or a couple of gallons of water, you know how heavy it is. They could just pull that up against gravity without any pumps or hearts or anything. And it's all because of capillary action, which is pretty amazing. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have any taller plants. So that's because of the adhesion of it sticking to the sides of the xylem, and then the cohesion of the water molecules sticking to each other. Okay, so this is a little diagram of the plant. What you get is, because of respiration, water is given off by the leaves. That creates a low water potential at the leaf surface. There's a high water potential at the root base. If, of course, the soil is moist. So water will move from its area of high pressure to low pressure. And as it does that, it goes up. It kind of helps it drive up this xylem. And the xylem, because they're long tubular cells, they allow for that capillary action, that cohesion of the water molecules sticking to each other, and the adhesion of the water molecules sticking to the side of the cells. And that allows for plants to be tall, which is actually pretty amazing. And then the other really cool thing about water is that it's less dense as a solid than as a liquid. And as I said, this is very rare. If you took, for example, vinegar and you made ice cubes out of vinegar, and then you put them in a jar of vinegar, they would sink to the bottom immediately. So ice floats. If ice didn't float, oh, it already says that on the slide. Well, if ice didn't float, what would happen?
bodies of water would become frozen solid in winter, killing almost all life within.
That's right. I wonder where you got that information. Yeah, exactly. So life on this planet actually depends on the fact that water is less dense in its frozen state than in its liquid state. So that's kind of cool. And what happens is the hydrogen bonds actually expand as they become more stable. So as they freeze and become a solid, they actually expand, which is a rare property. And yeah, if they didn't, then our oceans would freeze over, and the lakes would freeze over, and everything in them would die. So eventually we would die. So kind of cool property. Of course, ice isn't necessary for life. Planet has been free of ice before, and I guess we're heading that way. Back in the time of the dinosaurs, there were no poles, no icy poles for a while. Okay, so when water freezes, each molecule forms a stable hydrogen bond with the four neighbors, and this three-dimensional crystal results, and there is more space between the water molecules than there is when they are liquid. Polar bears like ice. Yeah, polar bears are in decline because ice is in decline and they need it to hunt off of. They hunt for seals in the springtime when the ice breaks up. If it breaks up too fast, then they do not get an opportunity to get enough food. And as the ice floes get farther and farther apart, polar bears are very, very good swimmers, of course, but their babies are born in the springtime, and that's when they need to start eating and put on calories, and they need to, the babies need to keep up with mom. And if mom has to swim too far to get food, then the babies die. So there's been a real decline in the survival rate of polar bear cubs in the last few years because of the diminishing sea ice. Okay, that takes us to pH. Are there any questions so far? Have I been going too fast? Anybody want to ask anything?
Can you clarify what makes an ion an ion?
Yes, I can do that. So an ion ions equal charged atoms. If an atom gains an electron, which I'll just call an E minus. Oh, it didn't keep typing. If an atom gains an E minus, an electron, then it becomes a negative ion. And if an atom loses an electron, because electrons are negatively charged, so it becomes a positive ion. So if you think about when sodium has one outer electron. So sodium is uncharged, but when it drops that electron, then it becomes electron. I'm a good typer. Drops that, not tie-hat. Drops that electron, it becomes Na plus. Should be capital N. Because it loses an electron. And then when chlorine gains that extra electron, it will become Cl minus. So electrons that get an extra, atoms that get an extra electron become negative ions, and atoms that lose one of their electrons become positive ions. Okay?
So atoms can transition between ionic and non-ionic state?
Yeah, some can. Not all will do that, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
At least that's my understanding. Not being highly proficient in chemistry. I got this weird thing up here. What is this? Set up professional audio. I don't want that. Okay. So I'm getting weird little notices here. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. You can see me again if you want to. Okay. So let's go ahead. We have some time and we'll go ahead and do pH. Any other questions before I move on?
I just have one more question. Sorry.
No, don't apologize.
An ionic bond is a transfer of electrons from one atom to the other, and then they stay together because they've shared, but they're not actually like attached. Is that true? And then a covalent, is that how you say it?
Yeah, covalent is when they're sharing them. So the electrons are basically hanging around both, like a hydrogen and a hydrogen, and they both have that one extra electron. So they get together, but the electrons sort of go around the whole thing. So they're sharing them. Yeah, it's kind of hard to understand. And then the ionic, it's like one gives up the electron, so it becomes charged, and the other one grabs the electron, so it gets charged. And because they're charged, they hang out with each other because the opposite charges attract. And it actually does make a strong bond. Although it seems like it wouldn't. It seems like they just go off with their electrons, but they don't. They hang out together.
But they're not sharing. Or they're
not really sharing. The chlorine has grabbed that electron and is hanging onto it, and sodium says, you can have it because I'm happier without it.
Okay, that's useful.
Okay. It's a little hard to wrap your head around, but just realize that we don't have to understand it really well for this class. It's a beginning if you go on to take chemistry. Okay. Okay, so pH. So pH, it stands for the potential of hydrogen. When you put, well, water is an aqueous solution. When things are in water, some of the water molecules actually break apart into ions. So some become hydrogen ions. They let go of their electron. And then some become hydroxide ions, so OH minus. So OH minus plus H plus, you put it together, it's H2O. But because it's polar, because it's a polar covalent molecule, they can break up into these ions. So these ions are very reactive, and there's a specific balance between the two that is very, it's real critical for chemical processes to take place. We're going to talk about how pH affects chemical processes because it affects enzymes, and enzymes drive chemical reactions. So solutions in water can be either acidic if they have a lot of hydrogen ions, positive hydrogens, or they can be basic if you have a high amount of hydroxide ions. So high hydrogen equals an acid, high hydroxide equals a base. Okay, it's measured on a scale from 0 to 14. Okay, so acids are things that will donate. I'll get to the scale in a second. Let's do this first. Acids are called acids because they donate hydrogen ions to solution. So some examples for would be hydrofluoric acid, hydrochloric acid, H, sulfuric acid, SO4. So if you look at all these, there's that hydrogen here. Come on, give me the pencil back. Here, we'll make it yellow. So you can see these hydrogens, hydrogens, hydrogens. It can donate those to the solution, raising the amount of H plus in the solution and making it an acid. So that's how you can kind of identify acids, is they're usually going to have a big H there in the middle. Okay. Now how bases work, rather than donating hydroxide to the mix, the aqueous solution, they actually suck up hydrogen ions. So by sucking up the hydrogen ions, they leave behind hydroxide ions. They don't actually donate the hydroxide, they suck up the hydrogen. So bases, some examples of bases, a strong base would be sodium hydroxide. So again, this should be a big N, but sodium hydroxide is a strong base. And you're going to see the OH on the end here. So that OH is actually going to join with any loose hydrogen ions in solution, making water, actually leaving behind more sodium, more hydroxides, making it basic. So just remember, more H plus, more acidic, more OH minus, more basic. Okay, and it's a scale. The pH scale is a logarithmic scale. That's 1 to 14. Let's draw it here. So we have actually 0. Pretend it's a straight line to 14. That's the pH scale. So in the middle you have 7, and 7 is neutral. 14 is basic, very basic, maximum basic. 0, I mean, it doesn't actually go all the way to 0, but you know, 0.00001 or something, acidic. So the more closer to 0 it is, the more acidic it is, the closer to 14 the solution is, the more basic that solution is. So it's a negative log 10 scale. It's a negative scale in order to make the pH numbers positive, and it's a log 10 scale, and what that means is that every division is going to be 10 times the one before it. So for example, a 1, 2, 3, I didn't do this to scale very well. 4, 5, 6, not to scale here, but anyway. So 3, the difference between a 1 and a 3 is going to be 1 to 2 is going to be 10 times. So 2 is going to be 10 times more basic than a 1. A 3 is going to be 10 times 10. So it's going to be 100 times more basic than a 1. So going by that, let's see, 2, a pH of 2 would be blank times more blank than, let's say, pH 6, for example. So if you went from a 2 to a 6, first of all, is it going to be more acidic or more basic?
More basic, pH 6.
Base.
Yeah, so a pH 2 is, there should be an is in there, blank times more than a pH 6. It's going to be acidic, right? Maybe you're not understanding the way I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. And then how many times? Because you're going to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's going to be 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. So that's 10 to the 4.
Oh, E4. Oh, yeah, 10 to the 4.
So that's 4 zeros. So it's going to be, whoops, a little carried away with a comma there. So it's going to be, yeah, 10,000 times more, right?
Yeah.
So you can see it looks like a small scale, 0 to 14 doesn't seem that big. It's huge, So you can kind of think of it like the Richter scale. A 5, an earthquake that's a 5 is a lot smaller than an earthquake that's a 7. It's not exactly the same because the earthquake scale, which I forget what you call it, other than the earthquake scale, seismic scale. The what?
The Richter scale?
Thank you. The Richter scale, I think it's like powers of 30 or something like that. But anyway, it's not a log 10 scale. It's not as neat as the pH scale. But anyway, that gives you an idea of the range of pHs. Neutral is a 7. So neutral is would be like pure water with all the minerals taken out. So deionized water. Okay, and that's what it explains here. So yeah, for example, a solution with pH of 1 is 100 times more acidic as a solution with a pH of 3. A solution with a pH of 12 would be 1,000 times more basic than a solution with a pH of 9. So those make good exam questions. Okay, and so this is the pH scale. This is just some normal everyday stuff and where it falls on the pH scale. So battery acid, really acidic. You don't want to touch that stuff. Lemon juice and gastric juice. So that's the gastric juice, the juice in your stomach is pretty acidic. It's around a 2. Grape juice, beer, vinegar is around a 3. Tomato juice is around a 4. Rainwater is slightly acidic. Human urine is slightly acidic. Pure water would be water with all the minerals and everything taken out of it. And that's neutral. Human blood is a little bit basic. Seawater, a little bit more basic. And going down to some household chemicals, ammonia, bleach, and oven cleaner. Oven cleaner, nasty, very basic stuff. So anything at the high end of the base scale or the high end of the low end of the acidic scale is very damaging to tissue. So you don't want to come in contact with things that are very acidic or very basic. They're both very dangerous. Yep. And we're going to talk about maintaining of a stable pH is very important for biology, biological processes. Enzymes that facilitate reactions are pH sensitive. So we're going to be talking about that when we talk about enzymes and how they work. Buffers are substances that minimize changes in pH, and the buffers work by either pulling hydrogen ions out of solution when they're in excess or donating them when they're depleted. So a lot of biological fluids actually contain buffers to help maintain your pH levels, and blood is an example of one of those fluids. Okay, this is just a chemical reaction. So just to introduce you to chemical reactions real quick, reactants are what you start with, products are what you end with. So this little reaction we have down here, 2H2 plus O2 goes to 2H2O. So hydrogen and oxygen can react to form water. So in this equation, the hydrogen and oxygen atoms are the reactants and the product is water. The arrow indicates which direction it goes. Water actually can go in both directions. So if I could actually draw the arrow in the other direction, and then water would be the reactant and the hydrogen and oxygen atoms would be the products. So it's all depending on what side of the arrow they are on. The elements on one side of the arrow will always match the number of elements on the other side of the arrow because following the second law of thermodynamics, following the first law of thermodynamics, matter is neither created nor destroyed. So you have 2 H2s on this side. So that's 4 hydrogens basically. And on this side, you also have 4 hydrogens, 2 H2s would be 4 hydrogens. You have 1 O2, that's 2 oxygens on this side. And on the other side of the arrow, you have 2 in the beginning here. So that's oxygen. So you also have 2 oxygens here. This is 2 full water molecules. So anyway, we'll be reading some chemical equations, and I just want you to know that they should always be balanced. Matter shouldn't disappear out of a chemical reaction. It's one way to make sure that you've got the right chemical reaction, is that everything is balanced from one side of the arrow to the other. Does everybody see that? Hopefully.
No, I don't understand that.
Okay. We can get to all of this later. Okay, so let me just do a quick share on that. Okay. Okay. So you don't understand the balancing of the,
Or not how it's depicted.
okay, so let me try it this way. I'll just do the same equation. So 2H2 plus O2 goes to 2H2O2. Okay, so this, what this is showing is 2 basically H2s. So that's going to be, each one of those H2s is 2 H's, right? An H and an H and an H and an H. Okay. So that's going to be H2, 2 of them, it's going to be 4 H's. Does that make sense?
Yes.
O2, so that's O double bonded to an O, so that's 2 oxygens. So we go over here, we have the 4 H's again, right? 2 H2. But this whole thing means 2 H2Os. So you have the 2 H2s, which are the 4 H's, which match with that. And then you have the O, so it's 2 oxygens again.
Okay. That makes sense.
It's like a parenthesis. Whenever you have the 2 in the front, it's like a parenthesis around those. If you're thinking like an algebraic expression. Did that help?
Yes, very much. Thank you very much.
Oh, cool. Okay, and we're going to stop there. Anything else that's on that slide, we're going to get to later because we're going to talk more about chemical reactions. So anybody else having any questions? Okay, I will see you on Thursday. I'll hang around for a minute in case anybody has any questions. I just got to go check on something.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, sister.
Hey, so the packet that is it due on the 9th or the 11th?
The packet, if you're in, who asked me that, Chad?
Yes.
You are in Thursday's lab, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so it'll be due Thursday. If you're in
Okay.
today's lab, it's due today, yeah.
Okay.
You should get it done before you have the group thing. I mean, I think it's actually the date is like midnight the same day, but yeah, technically you should get it done before you do the group thing. So that's done, and then you do the group thing, and then yeah.
Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that I had everything in
Oh, never
okay.
mind. You can go first.
Okay, hold on. Let Kara go first.
I wanted to make sure that I turned everything in okay with the group project that we did today, because I don't know if it uploaded right before it's too late.
Okay, yeah, I can check that.
Okay.
And then who else had a question?
I had a question after.
Okay. Is it something I can just answer or do you, because I gotta look.
I think you can just answer it.
Okay, go ahead.
For the first quiz, is it on the lab sheet, the coronavirus lab sheet? The first quiz that we have?
The first quiz, yes, will be on the coronavirus.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's it. I think have a nice day.
Sure, no problem. Okay, and which class are you in, Kara? Oh, you're 29, okay. While I'm looking that up, does anybody else have something for me?
I took the quiz and I think that I got marked wrong on a question that is not wrong.
Okay. Some of the questions have to be graded afterwards, so they might not.
Yeah, I mean one that was actually marked incorrect.
Oh, okay.
I sent you an email and I left a note on the quiz itself.
I'll check it out. Which question was it? Do you remember off your hand?
Number 7.
Number 7?
It's
Okay.
the one about what is the virus name?
Oh, okay. You probably got it wrong, but I'll check it.
It causes coronavirus. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank
But
you.
I will double check that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Have a good week. See you Thursday.
Okay, let's see. Grades. And Kara wants to see. This thing, when I copied it from one to another. Okay, group activity. Okay, hold on. It looks like it's, wait. It's acting weird. Hold on a second. Let me try opening it again.
Okay, I thought I put them both as PDFs so that it wouldn't be an issue, but
Hold on. I tried to click on it and then something else got in the way. And okay. So you have the pages part. Usually I can't read. Let me see if it's a Google Docs. If I click on that.
there should be 2 parts. One, they both should be saved as PDFs so that you should be able to see them. If they're not, I can try resubmitting.
Yeah, try resubmitting because I'm getting all I'm getting is like part of the questions. I'm getting like the first page with part of the questions. When I click on it to download it, yeah, both of them are giving me the same thing. Yeah, try again.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Will it let me just do it as a comment underneath it?
Oh yeah, because the pages part don't do it. Yeah, you can either you can resubmit. Yeah, if you have to add it in the comments, you can do that too.
Okay.
Yeah, because yeah, you're right. I didn't get it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked.
Okay. All right, Connor, did you need something?
I did. I have a quick question. I don't want to keep you too long though. If you got to take off, I don't want to hold you hostage.
It's okay. I just got to walk my dog.
I'm sure he's excited about it then.
He's waiting.
I had a question. It's a little bit late. It was from last week's lecture about independent and dependent variables. I was wondering if you could help sort of clear up what it is. I'm sure I've had like 3 or 4 science classes and they've all explained it to me and I'm still not quite on the straight and narrow with it.
I always have to think about it for a second before yeah.
So the example in the lab was COVID. It was people of color versus cases per 100,000 people. I was curious. I think I put it down. Actually, I can check which one I put down as which. But maybe just like trying to figure out if I can explain my reasoning will help out a little bit.
Just remember the dependent is the measured, so it's what you measure. The independent is kind of what you start with, or the experimental variable. So in this case, it's sort of like what you start with. Is it a Black community or not a Black community? And then the measurement is going to be your dependent. Is that what you got?
I think so. I might have not though. I have independent as percent of the Black community and dependent as cases per 100,000 people, but it's reversed, right? Where dependent is the measurable and independent.
No, you're correct the first time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, the rule of thumb is dependent is what you measure. Like in our tomato plant experiment example, the experimental variable is the independent variable. So that would be what iron, whether you're growing with or without iron. So that's your experimental, your independent. And then you would be measuring over time, you'd be measuring the height. That would be your dependent variable.
Right, because it's what you measure.
Yeah, it's either what you start with is the independent or what your experimental variable is. And then dependent is what you're measuring to see the differences between groups.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, I'm sure I'm gonna have to look it up every time I hear independent and dependent, but that's good. I'm glad if I think about it, I at least can somewhat get close to being right.
Yeah, I had to do that too, because I think the words, I don't know, something about the words are being too similar that I still have to hesitate for a second and make sure I get it right, because I will mix them up.
Gotcha.
So maybe your brain's like mine.
I hope so. Well, thank you very much. I'll see you on. No.
No, I hope it works better than mine does.
I guess we'll find out. Thank you very much.
Sure,
We'll
no
see you on
problem.
Thursday.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, so I was able to, I believe it went as a PDF for the project part this time. And then on the questions where it showed up as like a Google Doc, because I wasn't the maker of the Google Doc, I can't get back to it, but I did copy and paste those answers into my individual one as well. So it'll just be in the lab packet of my other stuff, if that makes sense.
Okay, so go back and check your other, excuse me. So the articles are going to be in the attached to the independent.
Oh wait, I just
What
found,
you're telling me?
yeah, but I just found I still have it open, so I should be able to. I've not had much work with with Google Docs, but we did it that way so everybody could work on it at the same time. Is there like a save as thing for Google Docs?
Why did this thing is like scattering everything all over the place for me? Okay, hold on.
If I have to, I can print it out and then take pictures of it to post to.
Okay, I still have just your original, what you originally sent me in the group. Did you redo it?
It should have oh, hold on, that was my fault, sorry. It just resubmitted with the one. And it's showing PDF on my side now too, compared to before.
Yeah, I just have the old one.
Sorry.
It's all right.
You can take Word documents, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this Google Doc is letting me switch it to or download it as a Word.
Okay, your independent thing has come through. Fine. And then you said the articles were at the bottom of it?
Yeah, so how you originally had it, where when we opened it, it had the individual and the group stuff all on one document. I just saved it and edited that.
Okay. Yeah, I see the articles there.
Okay. I'll try adding this other into the comments on there just so it's all in the group.
So all you really have to do is send me the presentation.
Okay.
You don't have to send them together because I can read that from here. And basically, I'm just looking that you did the articles. That's, you know, basically. And then, yeah. So if you can just send me the presentation in a form that I can, and again, I can't read anything that's dot pages.
Yeah, no, it was supposed to switch over to PDF, but I don't know if I saved it wrong or.
Okay, you wanted me to recheck it? Let me see. Group 1. Activity. Okay. Oh, yeah, here it is.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, you're all set.
All right, thank you so much. I'm glad I said something. Bye, have a good night.
Yeah, you too. See you Thursday.